MSNBC's Joy Reid can't believe that Americans would ever support Trump, so much so that she's saying Republicans are gaming the polls. Let's watch.
Have you noticed how sharply the polls have shifted in Trump's favor over the last couple weeks? With these claims that Trump is surging with Black and Latino voters and leading in every single swing state, according to secret internal polls, despite all the Hitler talk. Yes, this race will be far too close. Because unfortunately, we do have a fascist groundswell in parts of this country, mainly among white men, let's be clear, but in small pockets among Black and brown men, too. This happens to be a global phenomenon as women become more economically independent and seek positions of power. But friend of the show, Simon Rosenberg, points out that just like in 2020 and 2022, dozens of right-wing polls have been dumped into the marketplace in the last few weeks, 12 in Pennsylvania alone. Those polls then swing the polling averages to the right, making Trump look strong and Kamala Harris look stalled. Now, there are lots of explanations for why you'd want to game the polls. Entrepreneurial Republican pollsters can certainly gain favor with Trump, who's apparently fuming about Vice President Harris's billion-dollar fundraising and positive press. And then there's the more sinister explanation that if Trump, Republican pollsters, and even jittery Democrats convince enough people that his victory is inevitable, how much easier would it be to claim that the election was stolen if he loses? And how much easier would it be to get his base to rise up and maybe even get violent the way they did when he lost the last time?
Reid didn't stop there. She also said that Trump and Republicans are warping Americans' minds with their massive disinformation campaign. Let's watch.
Trump and Republicans, backed by far right-wing billionaires like Elon Musk and right-wing media and anti-woman manosphere podcasts, are creating social media or gaming social media apps like X Twitter in Trump's favor and pumping disinformation into the brains of Trump supporters. Not quite foreign interference, but not exactly different from what Vladimir Putin would do.
And if all of that wasn't enough, the host went on to say this. Let's watch.
Donald Trump is not running a normal election. He's talking America into damn near a civil war to terrify voters into supporting him. And if that doesn't work, he's laying the groundwork for insurrection 2.0.
So I have news for Joy Reid and anyone else in her thought camp here. The polls are not being gamed by Donald Trump. The polls, they might be inaccurate. We'll find out on election day. Last time, in the 2020 election, the polls, there was a massive polling error in Joe Biden's favor because he ended up winning by a lot less than the polls suggested. I don't know if that's what's happening now. It's possible the polls could be benefiting Donald Trump in some way. It's totally possible. Their polling errors do go both ways, although more of them have seemed to benefit Democrats in recent election cycles. That's not universally true. It's different in some races. But this is some copium for, I don't know, progressives of Joy Reid's bent that it's okay. We're winning massively. Donald Trump is such a fascist. Everyone hates him. No one will vote for him. The polls are lying. That is, to use a word you are fond of, I think that is disinformation.
So polls are interesting, as you know. The polling averages, and this is, I think, what she's alluding to, and probably could have explained it a little bit more specifically. Polling averages are a bunch of different polls that come out, say, over a 2-week period. And those polls can be center polls, more accurate polls to Republican or conservative polls, and Democratic polls, and official polls of the Harris campaign or the Trump campaign internal polls. And they average that all in one summary. And it is true. I'm looking at 538.com right now, and the last 6 polls that have come out, 5 polls that have come out in the last couple of days, from October 12th to 14th, are conservative polls. Patriot polling, Acti polling, Patriot polling did another one. So that does affect the average. I don't know if their strategy is correct. I don't know if there's this vast, there might be a conspiracy behind it or a strategy from the Trump campaign. I don't want people to think that Kamala Harris is winning, I think that they should be running scared, and that every single person should be thinking about what could potentially happen if Donald Trump were elected. I do think it's fair for her to mention that Donald Trump will question the election, and if the polls are saying, and the conservative poll average, which is really the last week, is saying that he's likely to win, yeah, absolutely he's going to challenge it, because that's what he's done. It's like you judge history by someone's behavior in the past. Of course, social media, you have Elon Musk, who owns X, that has been devalued 80% and has a mass exodus, and now basically who's left is like right-wing incels and, journalists who just love to get the attention, media people. I'm on there too, I know. I've been called out for it. But I'm not as active as I used to be, and a lot of folks aren't as active. So yeah, there's disinformation spreading on Twitter, without a doubt. The FEMA immigrant crisis, that was a classic example. It's been fact-checked. It's really hard to push through fact-checks.
Am I allowed to say that FEMA was maybe not doing a great job at all times or getting enough resources to people? Is that misinformation?
We talked about this, though. They had a staffing crisis, and part of that is because their funding was cut, and they just didn't have enough staffing, and staff were overworked, and they were going through multiple natural disasters, and the turnover rate was pretty high. And so they have positions that are empty, and now folks are doing the job of like 6 people.
All right. Well, I'm glad some criticism of them is still permissible. But I want to get back to the polling part of this. I mean, yes, there are polls that are more favorable to conservatives and to the GOP, or that, maybe the polling firm is that way too. But if you started excluding those, and you didn't also exclude the ones that are more favorable on the other side, then you would end up with a skewed poll on behalf of Kamala Harris. Like, that's exactly the problem that Nate Silver, for instance, is trying to prevent when he says that's why he likes to take. I mean, he does, I think, exclude some polls that he thinks are not, that are way outside the bounds or are not well done. But he says you want to take an average because, yeah, you want some firms that have been more favorable in terms of the results for Republicans, as well as the ones for Democrats, and that's why you do the average, and that's what ends up being the most accurate. If you start saying, well, we think this poll is not good because its result is too far outside what we expect, because we're expecting a Kamala +1, and this has, Trump +3 or something, we're taking that out, that ends up skewing the average more in favor of the Democrats, and then the pollsters wake up surprised, or the pundits who were following that wake up surprised on Election Day when it's actually much closer. I mean, that's almost exactly what happened last time.
Well, what happened last time, there are a lot of factors that happened last time. What I was mentioning to you is just this last week, the only polls that came out were conservative polls. Yeah. Yes, 2 weeks ago, Kamala Harris had a poll come out the same week as Morning Consult. But if you're going to average for 1 week and it's all conservative polls that were released that week, that's concerning. I do think Nate Silver is being smarter. Last time we had a different situation in which we had millions and hundreds of millions of new voters voting that don't usually vote because of the pandemic, because of mail-in voting, because of a surge in new registration. And so it was very hard to pull that because it was just a completely unique year. 2016, of course, polls said that Hillary Clinton was going to win, so much so that they were not running scared. They didn't even have an office in Wisconsin. They didn't put voter outreach operations in Pennsylvania the way that they should have in previous years. And obviously we saw what happened, even though she won the popular vote.
But that was self-delusion, right? I mean, if you actually look at the polls in 2016, by the end, what they showed was an extremely close race. They showed Hillary Clinton very barely ahead, or even tied exactly with Donald Trump. But the Hillary Clinton campaign was so sure of themselves, the pundits were so sure that Donald Trump could never win, they were actually ignoring the polls, or just saying, it always looks close right before the election. So it wasn't really in 2016, it wasn't really a polling error. It was a pundit error. It was a misinterpretation of the polls. Whereas in 2020, there was a genuine polling error, but the polls were so favorable to Biden, he still did end up winning, just by a lot less. So it's interesting, or what we think of what was 2020 was the polls are wrong. 2016 was the take-havers, the people like you and I, not specifically you and I, people in our field who were wrong.
Yeah, and they didn't go out. They didn't go out into the field. They didn't talk to voters. Yeah. It was like Beltway syndrome, where have you talked to a working person? Do you understand what's happening in these communities? Do you understand how NAFTA works? People would roll their eyes. I mean, trust me, I was in the Bernie campaign. We were screaming about these issues because we were in a lot of those communities doing well in the primaries and saw folks who were still frustrated with the Democratic Party. And and the Clinton campaign didn't listen to us. But we hopefully have learned our lesson as a collective, and that's probably why Kamala Harris is running scared. With that being said, hopefully the press has learned their lesson as well. And I don't know if they have. And, it's hard to deprogram Beltway syndrome, right?
Yeah.
It's like put a bunch of Ivy League people together, give them all the power in the world to talk about elections and working people, and you can't deprogram that overnight.
I hear that. Well, that does it for us today on Rising. Thanks so much for tuning in. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can find podcasts. See you later.